The Great Hall of the Galactic Council was bigger than most cities. Crystal walls stretched up so high that clouds formed near the ceiling. Thousands of different alien species filled the floating seats, each one glowing with their own light. The air buzzed with translator devices working hard to turn hundreds of languages into something everyone could understand. Ambassador Zethkar stood at the center podium. His blue skin shimmered as he moved his four arms in grand gestures. The Vorthani were one of the oldest species in the council, and they never let anyone forget it. Today, Zethkar had something important to say. "Fellow council members," his voice boomed across the hall. "We have watched the newest species for 300 years. The humans have shown us enough. It is time to invite them to join our great family." A ripple of interest moved through the crowd. New species were always exciting, especially when they came from such a small, backward part of the galaxy. The humans lived on only one world when most council species controlled hundreds of star systems. Counselor Vexara of the Crystalline Collective spoke first. Her body was made of living diamond that caught and threw light in beautiful patterns. "What makes these humans special? Their technology is basic. Their ships are slow. They have not even left their small corner of space," Zethkar smiled with too many teeth. "That is exactly why they are perfect. They are weak enough to control, but smart enough to be useful. They will make excellent servants for the greater species." The ancient ethereal dominion floated in their energy forms near the top of the hall. Their leader, known only as the First, spoke in a voice like wind through metal. "We have seen many young species. Most are too proud. They think they deserve respect just for existing. What makes these humans different?" "They are humble," Zethkar replied. "When our scout ships appeared in their system, they did not attack. They sent messages asking if they could help us. When we told them about the galaxy, they asked if they could learn from us. They know their place." This caused excited chatter throughout the hall. Too many new species came in making demands, wanting equal treatment right away. It was refreshing to hear about one that understood how things really worked. Commandant Thexara of the Galactic Defense Force was less impressed. Her gray skin bore the scars of 100 battles, and her red eyes had seen too many wars. "Humble can mean weak. Weak species cause problems when stronger ones try to take what they have. These humans are not that kind of weak," Zethkar assured her. "They are smart weak. They know they cannot fight the galaxy, so they will not try. They will accept whatever place we give them and be grateful for it." The debate went on for hours, but the outcome was never really in doubt. The council loved adding new species, especially ones that would not cause trouble. The humans sounded perfect, advanced enough to be useful, but backward enough to control. When the vote came, it was almost unanimous. Only a few species voted against, and they were always voting against everything anyway. The humans would be invited to join the Galactic Council as junior members. 6 months later, the human ship arrived at Nexus Station. The ship was small and ugly compared to the beautiful vessels of the major species. It looked like someone had welded together spare parts and hoped for the best. The council members who bothered to watch the docking procedure smiled at each other. This was exactly what they had expected. Dr. Sarah Chen stepped off the ship with 12 other humans. She was a small woman with dark hair and nervous eyes that tried to look at everything at once. Her clothes were simple and practical, nothing like the flowing robes and energy fields that the important species wore. Zethkar met them at the docking bay with a small crowd of other council members. They wanted to see these new humans for themselves. Chen approached with careful steps, clearly worried about making a mistake. "Welcome to Nexus Station," Zethkar said in the formal tone used for important occasions. "We are honored to have humanity join our great council." Chen bowed deeply, much deeper than was actually required. "Thank you, honored council members. Humanity is grateful for this opportunity. We hope we can prove worthy of your trust." "Perfect. thought Zethkar. The human even sounded grateful to be here. This was going to be easier than they had hoped. The tour of Nexus Station took 3 days. The humans walked through the great halls with wide eyes and open mouths. They asked polite questions about everything they saw. When Counselor Vexara showed them the crystal gardens, Chen actually gasped out loud. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "We have nothing like this on Earth." "Of course you don't," Vexara replied with what she thought was kindness. "Your species is still very young. Perhaps in a few thousand years, you will learn to make such things." The humans nodded eagerly, like students learning from a wise teacher. They took notes on everything and thanked everyone who spoke to them. When the first showed them the Hall of Histories, Chen asked if humans could study there. "We would love to learn about the great civilizations of the galaxy," she said. "Perhaps we could understand our place better if we knew more about those who came before us." The first was pleased by this request. Too many young species thought they already knew everything. These humans understood that they had much to learn. The negotiations for humanity's place in the council went smoothly. The humans accepted everything offered to them without complaint. The Zephyrians offered them 3 small systems in the outer rim, far from the important trade routes. Chen thanked them warmly. The Crystalline Collective proposed mining partnerships where humans would do the dangerous work in exchange for a small share of the profits. Chen said it sounded fair and asked when they could start. The Ethereal Dominion granted humanity observer status, which meant they could watch council meetings but not vote on anything important. Chen said they were honored just to be allowed in the room. The only thing the humans asked for was access to the Great Archive and permission to set up small research stations. Both requests seemed harmless enough. The archive was mostly full of old information that no one looked at anymore, and research stations were tiny things that would not bother anyone. "Of course," Zethkar said grandly. "Knowledge should be shared among all council species. We welcome human researchers to learn from our wisdom." The humans signed every agreement put in front of them. They asked no difficult questions and made no demands. When the ceremony was over, Chen gave another deep bow. "Humanity will work hard to earn our place among you," she promised. "We will not disappoint the council's faith in us." As the human delegation left to return to their ship, the council members congratulated themselves. This had been one of the easiest integrations in council history. The humans clearly understood how things worked and were willing to accept their proper place at the bottom of the galactic order. Zethkar watched the ugly human ship depart through one of the great windows. Soon, there would be human mining crews working in dangerous asteroids, while crystalline overseers stayed safe. Human researchers would study old files while the real work of running the galaxy continued above their heads. Human colonies would provide resources and ask for nothing in return. It was exactly how things should be. The strong ruled, the weak served, and everyone knew their place. The humans would fit in perfectly. None of the council members noticed that Dr. Chen had not seemed nervous when she thought no one was watching. None of them wondered why a species that had never left their home system already knew so much about galactic politics. None of them asked how humans had built a ship capable of traveling between stars if their technology was really so primitive. The humans departed as quietly as they had arrived. The council turned its attention to other matters, confident that they had gained useful new servants who would never cause them any trouble. They could not have been more wrong. 57 years passed like water flowing down a quiet stream. The humans had become part of the background noise of galactic politics. They paid their taxes on time, followed all the rules, and never caused any trouble. Most council members forgot they existed unless someone mentioned them directly. Ambassador Marcus Rivera had replaced Dr. Chen 15 years ago. He was a tall man with gray hair and calm eyes that never showed anger, even when he had good reason to be upset. Like Chen before him, he always spoke politely and never raised his voice, even when the council made decisions that hurt humanity. The human territories in the Outer Rim had grown slowly over the decades. They now controlled 7 small systems, instead of the original 3. The council had given them permission to expand because humans always asked nicely, and the systems they wanted were far from anything important. Rocky worlds with thin air and dangerous radiation were perfect for a species that seemed happy with whatever scraps they could get. Human mining operations had spread throughout the galaxy. They worked in asteroid belts that were too dangerous for other species and extracted resources from dead worlds that no one else wanted. The Crystalline Collective made huge profits from human labor while paying them just enough to survive. Everyone agreed this was a fair arrangement. Human research stations had become a common sight in empty systems. Small, quiet facilities that studied stars and planets and sent their findings to the Great Archive. The stations were so peaceful that other species often forgot they were there. Merchant ships would pass by without even bothering to say hello. In the council chambers, Rivera had earned a reputation as the most reasonable ambassador in the building. When the Vorthani decided they needed the Kepler system for military training, even though humans had been studying it for 20 years, Rivera simply asked if there was another system they could use instead. Of course, Ambassador Rivera, Zethkar had said with the tone adults use when speaking to children. "We will find you a suitable replacement. Perhaps the Vega system would work for your research?" The Vega system was half the size of Kepler and had no interesting planets, but Rivera thanked him as if he had been given a great gift. "The Council's wisdom guides us all," he said with a slight bow. "Humanity appreciates your consideration." When the Crystalline Collective increased taxes on human mining operations by 40%, Rivera did not protest. Instead, he asked for help setting up a payment schedule that would not bankrupt the human colonies. Vexara was so impressed by his reasonableness that she reduced the increase to 35%. "You see," she told other council members later, "this is how junior species should behave. The humans understand their place and work within the system instead of fighting against it." The council had also placed restrictions on human exploration. Humans were not allowed to travel beyond their assigned sectors without special permission. This permission was rarely given and took months to process. Rivera accepted these restrictions without complaint, though he occasionally asked if the rules might be relaxed for important scientific discoveries. "We understand the council's need to maintain order," he would say. "Perhaps small research expeditions could be allowed in specific circumstances?" Usually the answer was no, but Rivera never seemed disappointed. He would simply thank the council for considering the request and promise that humanity would continue to follow all regulations. Other species barely noticed the humans anymore. The ethereal dominion was dealing with border disputes in the Eastern Spiral. The Zephyrians were trying to expand their trade networks into new galaxies. The Vorthani were building bigger and more powerful warships to intimidate their neighbors. Humanity was like a quiet neighbor who kept their yard clean and never played music too loud. But some things were changing, though only a careful observer would have noticed. Human trade ships appeared in systems farther and farther from human space. When questioned, the captains always had reasonable explanations. They were delivering goods to mining operations, or returning from scientific expeditions, or stopping to repair their engines. The human research stations were also growing larger. What had started as small outposts with a few dozen scientists had become substantial facilities with hundreds of workers. Again, the explanations were reasonable. The stations needed bigger crews to process all the data they were collecting. They needed better equipment to study more distant stars. They needed larger living areas to house the families of long-term researchers. Human technology was improving too, but slowly enough that no one worried about it. Their ships were still ugly and functional rather than beautiful like council vessels. Their weapons were still simple projectile systems rather than the advanced energy weapons used by major species. Their computers were faster than before, but still could not match the quantum processors of the crystalline collective. Rivera himself had changed very little over the years. He still spoke in the same calm, polite voice. He still bowed at the right moments and thanked the council for every small favor. He still accepted whatever decisions were made without argument or complaint. The only difference was in his eyes. Sometimes, when he thought no one was looking, there was something else there. Not anger or frustration, but a kind of patient watchfulness, like someone waiting for the right moment to act, though no one could guess what he might be waiting for. The council's attention was focused on bigger problems. The Eastern Spiral dispute was turning into a small war. Several species in the northern arm were forming their own alliance and questioning council authority. Pirates in the southern reaches were becoming bolder and attacking merchant convoys. Humanity continued to quietly serve the galaxy's needs. Human miners extracted resources from dangerous asteroids, while council species counted their profits. Human researchers studied distant stars, while council scientists worked on more important projects. Human colonies provided food and raw materials, while council worlds enjoyed the benefits. It was exactly the kind of relationship the council preferred. The humans knew their place and stayed in it. They worked hard, followed orders, and never complained about their treatment. They were proof that the council system worked perfectly when everyone understood their proper role. Rivera attended council meetings twice a week, sitting in the observers section with ambassadors from other junior species. He rarely spoke unless directly asked a question, and his answers were always brief and respectful. When major decisions were announced, he nodded politely and took notes in a small book he always carried. The book was one of the few personal items Rivera allowed himself, in the sterile environment of diplomatic life. It had a worn leather cover and pages filled with careful handwriting. Other ambassadors assumed it contained meeting notes and diplomatic protocols. They never asked to see it, and Rivera never offered to share it. If they had looked, they would have found something very different from meeting notes. The book contained observations about council military capabilities, detailed analyses of interspecies relationships, and careful records of galactic resource flows. Most interesting of all, it contained lists of potential threats that the council seemed completely unaware of. But no one looked, because no one thought the quiet human ambassador could have anything important to hide. He was just Rivera, the reasonable one, the one who always agreed with whatever the council decided. He was part of the furniture now, as permanent and unnoticed as the crystal walls and floating seats. The years flowed by, and the humans remained exactly where the council wanted them: useful, obedient, and forgettable. Perfect servants for the superior species who ruled the galaxy. None of the council members suspected that they were being protected by the very species they looked down upon. None of them realized that human research stations were actually monitoring posts, watching for dangers the council could not see. None of them understood that humanity's humble acceptance of their role was not weakness, but patience. The humans were waiting, watching, and preparing. They had been doing so for 57 years, and they would continue for as long as necessary. Because someone had to protect the galaxy, even if the galaxy never knew it needed protection, especially from the things that were moving in the dark spaces between the stars, getting closer every day. The alarm started screaming at 3 in the morning, Galactic Standard Time. Throughout Nexus Station, council members were pulled from their sleep by emergency broadcasts that made their translator devices crackle with static. The message was simple and terrifying. The Devourers had returned. Most species had only heard stories about the Devourers. Ancient legends spoke of machines that ate entire star systems, leaving nothing but empty space where worlds once orbited. The oldest council members remembered when their great-grandparents whispered about the metal monsters that came from beyond the galaxy's edge. But those were just stories. Old fears from a more primitive time, except the long-range sensors did not lie. A fleet of massive ships was moving through the Kepler sector, and everything in their path simply disappeared. Stars went dark. Planets vanished from orbital mechanics calculations. Even space itself seemed to become empty and dead where the Devourers passed. Admiral Thexara stood in the Defense Force Command Center, her scarred face pale as she studied the incoming reports. "How many ships?" she asked her aide, though she was not sure she wanted to know the answer. "Unknown, Admiral. Our sensors can detect the fleet's mass, but individual ships are—" The aide paused, searching for the right words. "They seem to exist between dimensions. We can see their effects, but not the ships themselves." Thexara had fought in dozens of wars against dozens of different species. She had seen weapons that could crack planets and shields that could stop entire fleets. But she had never seen anything like this. The Devourers were not just destroying things, they were making them cease to exist entirely. "How long before they reach Council space?" she asked. "At current speed, 72 hours to the outer colonies, 108 hours to major population centers." The emergency council session was called for immediately. Species representatives arrived at Nexus Station from across the galaxy, their ships pushing engines to dangerous limits to reach the meeting in time. The great hall filled with worried voices speaking in hundreds of languages, all asking the same question. What could they do against an enemy that could erase star systems? Zethkar took charge of the meeting with his usual authority. "Fellow council members, we face a threat unlike any in recorded history. The Defense Force estimates we have 4 days to evacuate non-essential populations from the danger zone." The evacuation list appeared on screens throughout the hall. Hundreds of species were marked for immediate relocation. The list included all junior members of the Council, all colonies with populations under 10 million, and all species that did not have significant military capabilities. Humanity was near the top of the list. Ambassador Rivera read the evacuation order with his usual calm expression. Around him, other junior species were panicking. The Melonian representative was crying through her gills. The Compact of Small Worlds was demanding military protection for their evacuation ships. The Silicon Brotherhood was calculating how long it would take to move their slow-breeding population to safety. Rivera raised his hand with the polite gesture he used when requesting permission to speak. Zethkar nodded to him, though his attention was clearly focused on more important matters. "Honored council members," Rivera said in his quiet voice, "humanity respectfully declines evacuation." The hall fell silent. Even the panicking junior species stopped their noise to stare at the human ambassador. No one declined a direct evacuation order, especially not when the alternative was being devoured by machines from beyond the galaxy. Zethkar blinked his 4 eyes in confusion. "Ambassador Rivera, perhaps you did not understand. This is not a request. All non-essential species must evacuate immediately for their own safety." "We understand the order completely," Rivera replied with the same polite tone he always used. "However, our research stations contain decades of irreplaceable work. Our people have made these worlds their homes. We prefer to handle our own evacuation procedures." Vexara's crystalline body flashed with angry light. "This is not the time for sentimental attachment to material possessions. The Devourers will destroy everything in their path. You cannot negotiate with machines." Rivera nodded respectfully. "We appreciate the Council's concern for our welfare. Humanity will take appropriate measures to protect our people and our work. We ask only that the Council focus on protecting those who need it most." The first spoke from the energy fields where the ethereal dominion floated. "Young species often believe they are braver than they actually are. This is not bravery, human. This is foolishness." "Perhaps," Rivera agreed. "But it is our choice to make." Thexara leaned forward in her chair, her red eyes fixed on the human ambassador. She had always suspected there was more to humanity than they showed. "Ambassador, Do you have military assets that we are unaware of? Some defense capability that makes you confident you can survive this threat? Rivera paused for just a moment before answering. Humanity has always been prepared to defend itself, Admiral. We hope such measures will not be necessary, but we are not entirely helpless. The debate continued for another hour, but Rivera would not change his position. Humanity would not evacuate. They would protect their own people and their own worlds. They thanked the Council for their concern, but politely declined all offers of assistance. Finally, Zethkar gave up trying to convince them. There were more important species to worry about, ones that actually mattered to the galaxy's future. If the humans wanted to die for their research stations, that was their choice. 3 weeks later, the impossible happened. The Devourer fleet had swept through the outer systems like a cosmic storm. 2 Council defense flotillas had tried to stop them and simply vanished, their ships reduced to component atoms. The machines seemed unstoppable, their dark ships moving through space like holes in reality itself. Then, suddenly, they stopped. Long range. Sensors showed the Devourer fleet hanging motionless in space near the edge of human territory. Their energy signatures flatlined, their movement patterns ceased. For 6 hours, the machines that had terrified the galaxy's greatest military minds sat silent and dead in the emptiness between stars. When Council investigation ships finally reached the area, they found something that broke every rule of warfare. They understood. The Devourer fleet was completely intact, hundreds of massive ships floating in perfect formation, but they were empty. Not destroyed, not damaged, just empty. Their hulls were whole, their systems were undamaged, but nothing moved inside them. No energy flowed through their circuits. No signals passed between their ships. It was as if someone had reached into the machines and simply turned them off. Admiral Thexara led the investigation team personally. She had to see this with her own eyes, because the reports made no sense. As her ship approached the silent Devourer fleet, she could see the massive vessels that had destroyed star systems now floating like abandoned toys. "Admiral," her sensor officer called, "I'm detecting a human research station approximately 50,000 kilometers from the Devourer fleet. It's operational." Thexara felt a chill run down her spine. "Put them on screen." The small human station appeared on the main display. It looked exactly like every other human research facility. A cluster of simple buildings connected by flexible corridors with docking ports for small ships and solar collectors for power. Scientists moved between the buildings in protective suits, carrying equipment and taking readings. They were working as if nothing unusual had happened, as if they had not just witnessed the death of the most powerful fleet in galactic history. "This is Admiral Thexara of the Galactic Defense Force," she broadcast on standard frequencies. "Human station, please respond." A few minutes later, a woman's voice answered. She sounded calm and professional, like a researcher reporting on routine observations. "This is Dr. Sarah Chen of Research Station Kepler 7. Good morning, Admiral. How can we help you?" Thexara stared at the screen. Chen was the same human who had led the first delegation to the Council over 50 years ago. She looked exactly the same, not a day older, her hair still dark, her eyes still bright with intelligence. But that was impossible. Humans did not live that long. "Dr. Chen," Thexara said carefully, "we're investigating the status of the Devourer fleet. Can you tell us what happened here?" "Of course," Chen replied. "The machines experienced a cascade failure in their quantum processing networks. Their command and control systems became isolated from their operational matrices. It's quite fascinating, actually. We're collecting detailed readings on the phenomenon." The Admiral felt as if the universe had suddenly become a place she did not recognize. "Dr. Chen, are you saying this was a natural failure?" Chen paused, and for just a moment, her professional mask slipped. When she spoke again, her voice carried a weight that had not been there before. "Admiral, Sometimes the universe is more complex than our theories predict. We study these complexities so that we can better understand our place in the cosmos. The transmission ended, leaving Thexara staring at a blank screen. Around her, the bridge crew sat in stunned silence. They were warriors who had fought in hundreds of battles, but they had never seen anything like this. The most powerful enemy in galactic history had been stopped by a... The revelation came in pieces, like a puzzle assembled by reluctant hands. Admiral Thexara had returned from the Devourer fleet with more questions than answers, and those questions were starting to tear apart everything the Council thought. They knew about the galaxy. It began with the archives. Dr. Chen had mentioned that human research stations were sharing their data through standard Council protocols. When the archivists checked, they found something impossible. Humanity had uploaded more information to the Great Archive than any 3 major species combined. The data streams had been flowing for decades, but so quietly that no one had noticed. The files were organized with perfect efficiency. Star charts that covered regions no Council ship had ever visited. Detailed analysis of energy patterns in deep space, biological surveys of planets in unexplored systems, technological specifications for devices that Council scientists could not even begin to understand. Most disturbing of all were the threat assessments. Thousands of reports documenting dangers throughout the galaxy. Some were familiar: pirate fleets, rogue asteroids, unstable stars. Others described things the Council had never heard of: machine intelligences hiding in dead systems, parasitic life forms that could infect entire species, energy beings that fed on stellar radiation, and the Devourers. Humanity had been tracking them for over 20 years. Counselor Vexara stood in the archive's central chamber, her crystalline body dim with shock as she read report after report. "This is impossible," she whispered to the archive keeper. "How could they know about threats in systems we have never explored?" The archive keeper, an ancient ethereal named Keeper Ninth, flowed around the data displays like living mist. "The humans have been very thorough in their research, Counselor. Perhaps too thorough." Vexara pulled up a star chart that showed human research stations scattered throughout the galaxy. What the Council had thought were a few dozen small outposts turned out to be hundreds of installations carefully positioned to monitor every major shipping lane and strategic system. "Show me the installation reports," she demanded. The data that appeared made her light flicker with fear. Each human research station was far larger than they had appeared. What looked like simple scientific outposts from a distance were actually massive facilities with populations in the thousands. They had manufacturing capabilities, defensive systems, and communication networks that spanned the entire galaxy. But that was not the worst discovery. Admiral Thexara had requested a complete review of human military capabilities after the Devourer incident. The Defense Force had always assumed humanity was essentially defenseless, a species that relied on Council protection and had no significant weapons or warships. The truth was staggering. Thexara sat in her private office reading classified reports that made her question everything she thought she knew about warfare. According to the analysis, humanity possessed the most advanced military technology in the galaxy. Their ships used propulsion systems that could cross between star systems in days rather than weeks. Their weapons could disable enemy vessels without causing physical damage. Their sensors could detect threats from incredible distances. Most shocking of all, humanity had been using this technology to protect Council space for decades. Every major threat that had mysteriously disappeared before reaching populated systems had actually been neutralized by human intervention. Pirates that had vanished without a trace. Rogue AI systems that had suddenly gone offline. Dangerous alien artifacts that had been safely contained before anyone knew they existed. The humans had been the galaxy's guardians, and the Council had never even known. Ambassador Rivera received the emergency summons with his usual calm demeanor. He walked through the halls of Nexus Station toward the council chambers, nodding politely to the species he passed. Some looked at him with confusion. Now, others watched him with something approaching fear. Everyone was beginning to understand that the quiet human ambassador was not what he had seemed. The council chamber was packed with representatives from every major species. The atmosphere was tense with the kind of nervous energy that came before important decisions. Rivera took his usual seat in the observers section and waited patiently for the meeting to begin. Zethkar stood at the central podium, his blue skin darker than usual with stress. Ambassador Rivera, the council has some questions about recent events. We hope you will be willing to provide answers. Of course, Rivera replied in his quiet voice. Humanity has always been willing to share information with the council. The first spoke from the energy fields where the ethereal dominion floated. Let us begin with a simple question, human. How long has your species been aware of the devourer threat? Rivera consulted his worn leather notebook before answering. We first detected signs of machine intelligence beyond the galactic rim 23 years, 4 months, and 16 days ago. We have been monitoring the situation since that time. A ripple of shock ran through the chamber. The Council's most advanced sensors had only detected the devourers 3 weeks ago. Somehow the humans had been watching them for over 2 decades. Vexara's crystalline form flashed with angry light. If you knew about this threat, why did you not inform the Council immediately? We did inform the Council, Rivera replied calmly. The data was uploaded to the Great Archive according to standard information-sharing protocols. All threat assessments and monitoring reports have been available to Council members since they were completed. Keeper Ninth confirmed this with a reluctant flow of energy. The human statement is accurate. All data was properly filed and made available through standard channels. Vexara leaned forward in her chair. Ambassador, the Defense Force has reviewed your species' actions during the Devourer crisis. How did you neutralize their fleet? Rivera paused, seeming to consider his words carefully. The machines relied on quantum entanglement for coordination between units. We developed a method to isolate their processing networks from their operational systems. Once the command structure was severed, the individual units became non-functional. You developed this method in 3 weeks? Zethkar asked skeptically. No, Rivera said simply. We have been preparing countermeasures for potential threats for many years. The Devourers were one of 47 different scenarios we had contingency plans for. The chamber fell silent. The idea that humanity had been planning for dozens of galactic-level threats, while the Council remained unaware of most of them, was almost impossible to accept. The First's voice carried undertones of ancient authority. Show us your true capabilities, human. No more pretense. No more hiding behind false humility. What is humanity really capable of? Rivera closed his notebook and stood up slowly. For the first time in over 50 years of council meetings, he looked directly at the assembled representatives instead of keeping his eyes respectfully lowered. Humanity currently maintains a population of 812 billion individuals across 4,637 planetary installations throughout this galaxy, he said in the same quiet voice he had always used. Our technology is approximately 400 years more advanced than current council standards. We have been monitoring and protecting galactic civilization since our official first contact with council species. The numbers hit the chamber like physical blows. 800 billion humans, thousands of hidden colonies, technology centuries beyond what the council possessed. The species they had treated as servants had actually been their protectors all along. Counselor Vexara found her voice first. Why? She asked, her crystalline form flickering with confusion. Why hide your true nature? Why accept the treatment we gave you? Rivera's expression remained calm. but something changed in his eyes, a depth of sadness that spoke of decades of patient endurance. Because someone had to protect the galaxy, and we hoped that someday you would be ready to let us help openly. We hoped that patience and service would eventually earn us the respect of equals rather than the tolerance given to inferiors. Zethkar's 4 arms gestured wildly. But the trade agreements, the taxation, the restrictions on your expansion. Why did you accept terms that were clearly unfair? Because the cost of those agreements was small compared to the cost of galactic war, Rivera replied. Because maintaining peace was more important than maintaining pride. Because we believed that wisdom and patience would eventually triumph over fear and prejudice. Admiral Thexara asked the question that everyone was thinking. What do you want from us now? With your capabilities, you could easily conquer the entire council. What are your terms? Rivera looked around the chamber at the hundreds of species representatives, all watching him with mixtures of fear and confusion. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of decades of disappointment. We want nothing, he said simply. We never wanted anything except the chance to serve alongside you as equals, to share knowledge and work together to protect the galaxy we all call home. But we understand now that such cooperation may not be possible. The chamber erupted in heated discussions as species representatives tried to process what they had learned. The humans were not weak servants. They were powerful guardians who had been protecting the galaxy while pretending to be grateful for scraps from the council's table. The emergency sessions began immediately. Behind closed doors, the council's most powerful species met in rooms where no translators were allowed and no recordings were made. The conversations were heated, desperate, and filled with the kind of fear that came when the foundation of everything you believed suddenly cracked apart. Zethkar paced back and forth in the Vorthani private chambers, his blue skin dark with stress. They have been lying to us for 60 years, pretending to be weak while they were actually stronger than all of us combined. How do we know this is not some elaborate plan to conquer the galaxy? The first drifted in slow circles, energy fields, pulsing with agitation. The humans have had countless opportunities to attack us if conquest was their goal. They could have destroyed the council decades ago and taken whatever they wanted. Instead, they protected us from threats we never even knew existed. Admiral Thexara sat silent in her chair, studying tactical reports that made less sense every time she read them. The Defense Force analysis is clear, she said finally. Humanity has military capabilities that make our entire fleet obsolete. If they wanted to conquer us, the war would be over before we knew it had started. Counselor Vexara's crystalline form flashed with patterns of confusion and anger. Then what do they want? Why reveal themselves now? Why not continue the pretense? The answer came from an unexpected source. Keeper Ninth flowed into the chamber like living mist, carrying data streams that painted pictures in the air around the assembled leaders. Perhaps because pretense was no longer possible, the Devourer incident made their capabilities too obvious to hide. They were forced to choose between allowing the Council to die or revealing their true nature. The images showed human installations. Throughout the galaxy, massive facilities that had been hidden in plain sight for decades. Manufacturing centers that could build entire fleets. Research laboratories working on technologies the Council could not comprehend. Training facilities where millions of humans prepared for threats that had not yet emerged. They saved us, Thexara said quietly. The Devourers would have destroyed everything, and they stopped them. They have been saving us from dozens of threats for decades, and we never even knew. Zethkar's voice carried the bitter tone of wounded pride. They made us look like fools. They sat in our meetings and nodded politely while knowing they could have solved every problem we struggled with. They watched us make mistakes and never offered to help. They did offer to help, the first corrected. Every time Ambassador Rivera asked for access to dangerous systems, Every time he requested permission to expand research operations, every time he suggested new approaches to galactic problems, he was offering to help. We refused because we thought we knew better. The truth was too large and too terrible to accept easily. The Council had spent 60 years treating their protectors like servants. They had taxed them, restricted them, and looked down on them while the humans quietly worked to keep the galaxy safe. The species that should have been honored as heroes had instead been dismissed as useful inferiors. The public sessions were worse. When the emergency meetings reopened to all council members, the chamber filled with voices raised in fear, anger, and confusion. Some species demanded immediate military action against the human threat. Others called for negotiations to establish new relationships. A few simply sat in stunned silence, trying to process the magnitude of what they had learned. The Zephyrian Trade Federation was the first to break ranks. Their representative, a bird-like creature with bright purple feathers, stood up during Zethkar's opening remarks. "The Zephyrian Federation formally requests immediate expulsion of humanity from the Council," she announced in a voice sharp with fear. "No species can be allowed to maintain such deception. Their very presence makes them a threat to galactic stability." The Silicon Brotherhood agreed immediately. Their slow, rock-like forms could not move quickly, but their representative's voice carried across the chamber with grinding authority. "Humanity has demonstrated that they cannot be trusted. They have violated the fundamental principles of honest cooperation that make the Council possible." One by one, other species joined the call for expulsion. The arguments were always the same. Humanity had lied about their capabilities. They posed an unknown threat. They had made the Council look weak and foolish. Fear and wounded pride combined into a tide of anger that swept through the chamber. Some species tried to argue for a different approach. The Melonian representative, her gills still wet with tears of stress, suggested that humanity's protection of the galaxy should be rewarded rather than punished. A few smaller species pointed out that humans had never used their superior technology to harm anyone, but their voices were lost in the growing demand for action. The Council's most powerful members had made their decision, and smaller species rarely opposed them when they were united. Ambassador Rivera sat in his usual place in the observers section throughout the long debate. He took notes in his worn leather book and showed no reaction to the increasingly hostile speeches being made about his species. When representatives demanded answers about human intentions, he provided them calmly and honestly. When they accused humanity of planning conquest, he denied it without anger or defensiveness. He had the same patient expression he had worn for 60 years, but anyone watching closely might have noticed that he had stopped taking notes. Instead, he was simply sitting quietly, waiting for something. The final vote was called just before midnight, Galactic Standard Time. The motion was simple. The Galactic Council hereby expels humanity from membership and demands the immediate withdrawal of all human personnel from Council space. The results were announced in a chamber that had fallen completely silent. 437 species voted for expulsion. 12 voted against. 43 abstained. Zethkar read the results with grim satisfaction. The motion passes by an overwhelming majority. Humanity is hereby expelled from the Galactic Council, effective immediately. All human personnel must withdraw from Council space within 90 standard days. Rivera closed his notebook and stood up slowly. He walked down to the central floor of the chamber, his footsteps echoing in the silence. For the first time in 60 years, every eye in the Great Hall was focused on the human ambassador. "We understand," he said in the same quiet voice he had always used. "We had hoped for a different outcome, but we are not surprised by this one." He paused, looking around the chamber at the hundreds of species who had just voted to expel the guardians who had protected them for decades. His expression was calm, but there was something final in his eyes. We will respect your decision, Rivera continued. All human personnel will withdraw from Council space within the requested time frame. Our monitoring stations will go dark. Our defensive installations will be deactivated. Our protection protocols will be terminated. He gathered his materials with careful precision, placing his notebook in a simple bag along with the few other items he had brought to countless meetings over the years. You will have what you have voted for, a galaxy free of human interference. We will withdraw beyond the galactic rim and leave you to face whatever challenges arise without our involvement. Rivera walked toward the chamber's exit, then stopped and turned back one final time. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of centuries of wisdom and the sadness of hope finally abandoned. We want you to understand something. Humanity never asked for gratitude or recognition for our protection. We never expected to be honored for our service. All we wanted was the chance to work alongside you as equals, to share the burden of keeping the galaxy safe. He paused, and for just a moment, the mask of diplomatic politeness slipped away. What remained was a man who had spent his entire life serving people who would never see him as anything more than a useful inferior. But we also want you to understand what you are choosing. In the dark spaces between galaxies, there are things that make the Devourers look like simple machines. There are threats approaching that we have been preparing to face for decades. When they arrive, you will face them alone. Marcus Rivera, last ambassador of humanity to the Galactic Council, walked out of the chamber in complete silence. The great doors closed behind him with a sound like thunder. Within hours, human ships began departing from every system in Council space. They left quietly, without fanfare or farewell messages. Research stations powered down their equipment and sealed their facilities. Mining operations shut down their extractors and recalled their workers. Trade ships completed their final deliveries and turned toward the darkness beyond the galactic rim. The humans said nothing. They demanded nothing. They threatened nothing. They simply honored the Council's decision and left, taking with them their protection, their knowledge, and their quiet vigilance. In the weeks that followed, the galaxy began to feel different. Shipping lanes that had been safe for decades suddenly became dangerous. Pirate attacks increased dramatically. Strange signals appeared on long-range sensors, coming from directions where nothing should exist. Several outer colonies reported equipment failures that could not be explained or repaired.